There Follows the Dark, Chapter 1. The night hung low and heavy over the mighty elderwood. The forest stretched the span of a nation, and in truth was a nation unto itself, a nation at war with itself. Those brighter parts whose roots still held the old gods in their slumber, and whose leaves still drank in the light of the sun, were shrinking, though. The light was fading, as light is wont to do, as all things do. Even the old gods knew their fading, with their mother's son slain, and her corpse taken by the witch-finder knights who used that power to end the rule of antiquity. It is the nature of all things to live and die, only to decay and feed the earth, then rise and live again in new and more terrible forms. And terrible forms were stirring in the elderwood. Beyond the sun-kissed canopies, low in the loam, lay the shadows that have had many ages to deepen. Shadows cast by forgotten Methuselahs, where magic, long thought forgotten, still moved under the guiding touch of the grim Coven. Well, mostly grim. "Has anyone seen my wands?" Two women sat around what might generously be called a table, although it had been purpose grown as a flat space for them to do their work, and was, in fact, still connected to the ground by a robust root network. Both were beautiful beyond the dreams of Avalon, and tired in a way only someone who regularly had to deal with Jinx could possibly be. Ari cradled her jackal skull talisman and had been working on it right up until Jinx had popped up. A dull thud sounded through the quiet grove, then another, as Ari groaned and began knocking her head against the table. "You're going to give yourself splinters doing that, my love," Evelyn said blithely as she examined one of her long, gracefully tapering claws for imperfections. "There weren't any. There never were." "Okay, seriously though," Jinx said, leaning in between the two. "Wands, your eyeballs, a little help maybe?" "How?" Ari snapped, looking up at her with bared teeth. Her two-tone, golden black hair framed a face that was beautiful even twisted as it was in rank disbelief at her fellow witch's total negligence. Ari and Evelyn were both studies in classic beauty, although on two different ends of the spectrum. Where Ari was soft, Evelyn was sharp. Where Ari was alluring in the manner of a blooming flower, Evelyn was more like an elegantly wrought dagger, a perfect them. Jinx, on the other hand, was a whip. Her long limbs were corded with lupine muscle, and black-pinned eyes wrapped around two bright irises of pure blue. The fine strands of her hair, pale as starlight like her coven sister Evelyn, curled back only to terminate near the base of her skull where they blackened and twisted into coils of thorny black vines. She was a young witch, as the coven sisters went, but she was easily among the most dangerous. "Oh look, I don't ask you about your weird floating skull," Jinx said, gesturing dismissively towards Ari's totem. "So, all you need to know is that my wands are missing, alright? Have you seen them?" She leaned in, her two bright eyes wide, prompting Ari to draw back. "First of all," Evelyn said, finally looking up, "know that I say this with the caveat that I am not acknowledging those things you tote around as wands in any way, shape, or form. And secondly, no, I haven't seen them." Ari pressed a finger to each of her temples and massaged them as she blew out a harsh breath. "Jinx, I can't stress this enough. You cannot just lose they're not wands." Both Ari and Jinx eyed Evelyn, who had pointedly returned to examining her nails without looking at the pair of them, despite her interjection. "Totems," Ari finished, as she side-eyed her lover before looking back to Jinx. "They're literally a part of you," she continued, jabbing a finger at Jinx. "It shouldn't even be possible to lose them." Jinx's mouth stretched into an unsettling ear-to-ear grin. "Come on, that's not true. You told me just yesterday that I probably lost my mind years ago, and that's a part of me, right?" "Ha!" Evelyn barked out an undignified laugh as Ari's cheeks colored. Jinx was mocking her. "If you lost your—" Ari shot a look at Evelyn, who was eyeing her archly. "Totems, somehow, then it's your responsibility to find them." "Ugh, I hate that word," Jinx grumbled as she sagged comically before returned to the forest. "Fine, I'll keep looking. Maybe they just got hungry and wandered off." "Wait." All three witches froze at the voice that rang clear as a clarion bell through the grove. Even Jinx's hackles went up as she turned on her heel to start looking for the source, and found it around the same time the other two did. Morgana of the Ashen Owl descended on wings of bone and arterial crimson from the shadows above them. To call her beautiful would have been an insult. Ahri was beautiful. Evelyn was beautiful. Even Jinx, in her own whipcord fashion, was beautiful. The High Witch of the Coven, Morgana, was angelic. "My lady." The words were echoed between Ahri and Evelyn as they rose from the table and dropped to a knee in front of Morgana. Even Jinx, despite not being given to shows of respect, took a knee, although she did it with an insouciant little smirk on her face and didn't lower her head. It was something Ahri despised about Jinx. Not only was she disrespectful to Morgana, their leader actually seemed to encourage it, an indulgence she showed no one else in the Coven. "Jinx." Morgana spoke the name warmly, but there was a hint of admonition in her tone. "Where precisely are you going?" Jinx shrugged. "Looking for my wands. They wandered off." "Your wands," Evelyn flinched. "Wandered off," Morgana repeated dryly. "They do that sometimes." "I see." Morgana's full lips curved into a heartbreaking smile, and she floated gracefully forward to lay a hand on Jinx's head. "You are aware that losing track of such powerful objects could result in untold destruction, yes?" A high, sharp cackle escaped from Jinx as she looked up into Morgana's eyes. "Promise?" Rich, husky laughter bubbled out of Morgana as she patted Jinx fondly, and Ahri seethed. It was one thing to indulge Jinx, but encouraging her really did get on Ahri's last nerve. Not that she would say anything about it. Morgana must have her reasons, and neither Ahri nor Evelyn could deny that Jinx was powerful. She was easily the equivalent of in sheer magical might to any of the senior members of the Coven. That was something that rankled too, but less so than the blatant favoritism. Ahri couldn't very well begrudge Jinx her power. Her negligence and blasé manner, certainly, but her power was her own. "What do you wish of your little sisters?" Evelyn asked as Morgana's laughter trailed off. Morgana made a sultry hum in the back of her throat as she eyed Evelyn casually. "Just a tour and introduction for a new sister." Both Ahri and Evelyn winced. That wasn't a particularly glorious task. It was makework, really. It had to be done, obviously. A new sister had to be shown the wares and whys of things, but it was incredibly boring. I see you're all chomping at the bit to volunteer," Morgana said casually. The veiled barbs sank into Ahri, and she felt Evelyn react similarly. But just as Ahri was about to volunteer herself for the onerous task, "Sure, why not?" Jinx said with a shrug. "As long as she doesn't care about helping me look for my wands." "They're not wands." "Shut up, Eve." Evelyn glowered at Jinx, who flashed that mocking grin right back at her older sister. Ahri practically had to bite her tongue. On the one hand, she wanted to argue for the task. On the other, she really didn't want to do it. The main sticking point, really, was that it vexed her that Jinx had just earned Morgana's good graces again. "Thank you, dear. I'm sure she'll be agreeable. She's a lovely little thing. You'll get along famously, I'm certain." Morgana turned away and gave a gentle wave of her hand. The soft, dark loam split slowly as two slender trunks of dark, gnarled wood grew rapidly upward in parallel before reaching 6 feet, where they curled inward toward one another and bound together, forming an archway. The space between the saplings rippled, and Morgana called out, "Come through, dear. You are welcome here." The first thing she saw as she emerged into the dimly lit grove was the radiant form of Morgana, the great witch of the Ashen Owl, who wielded more power in her fingertip than most mages did in their whole bodies. Her strength was legendary. The second thing she saw were the 3 women kneeling in the grove before Morgana. 2 of them had their heads bowed, and they were heart-stoppers, no doubt, utterly beautiful in a way that made her feel completely inadequate. Both were wearing gorgeously crafted outfits that hugged and accentuated their bodies, and which left her feeling particularly ragged in her worn traveling leathers, sodden boots, and patched cloak, especially since she hadn't bathed in a few weeks. The third woman, though, She was looking up, first at Morgana, then at... Oh. It was a noise, more than a word, that escaped Lux's lips as she laid eyes on the third woman. A woman who could not have possibly been more different from Morgana and the other two, whose names she had yet to learn. The other three were visions of feminine beauty cast from wildly different molds, but this woman, she was breathtaking for a reason that Lux couldn't even properly put a finger on. Part of it was her eyes, black-pinned and knife-sharp blue. Part of it was the fact that, physically, she looked nothing like the others, all lean limbs and bare runner's muscle. The rest of it, however, was that smile. That too-wide, too-broad, too-pleased smile, and in the shadow of that smile, Lux saw the woman's lips move. Those thin, chapped lips moved silently around two words that left Lux wondering if her lip-reading skills were rusty. She had no idea what "found you" was supposed to mean. "I'd like you three to meet Lux, our newest and youngest sister," Morgana announced. "I'll spread the news to the others. I had hoped that more would be here when we arrived, but this was a bit last minute." One of the two women to Morgana's left stood. Her two-tone black and blonde hair fell in wavy curls around a face that wore an indulgent expression. "Greetings, little sister." She stepped forward and took Lux's hand in her own. "My name is Ari, and that," she nodded behind her to the statuesque and almost impossibly fair woman she'd left behind, "is my beloved better half, Evelyn. You are most welcome with us." Thank you. I'm glad to be here," Lux said quietly, then added a bit of forced mirth. "It's certainly better than being chased by witch-finders and sleeping in ditches." Ari's smile fell slightly, and Lux cursed inwardly. Why did she say that? Why did she have to... "Ha! I'll bet." Lux looked up and over at the lean, blue-eyed woman. Those eyes of hers were achingly captivating. The woman ducked past Morgana, got up to Lux, and rudely hip-checked Ari out of the way, who stumbled away with an undignified squawk of outrage. "Hey, Blondie, the name's Jinx." She grabbed one of Lux's hands that Ari had recently lost hold of and shook it vigorously before dropping it. "I'm going to show you around the forest here while we look for my wands." "Your... wands?" Lux repeated incredulously. "They're not wands," Evelyn called out over Jinx's shoulder as she seized one of Ari's tails, which had folded out and fluffed up in anger, and began dragging the irate witch back to the table. "They're abominations." "Potato, potato," Jinx said, giving Evelyn a stink eye as she brushed off the commentary before looking back at Lux. "So, what do you say? Want to come along?" Jinx stepped back and held out a hand. Her right hand. A hand that was black with veins of blue that trailed up past her elbow, terminating in sickly tendrils that crawled up towards her shoulder. And she was still smiling. Lux shot a look at Morgana, whose mouth had twitched slightly, the corner raising up in the shadow of a smirk as she swept past, as if to say, "You're on your own now." Except she wasn't quite on her own. Someone was offering to stay with her. "Okay." Lux took the hand, and Jinx grinned as she gripped it. Lux had been expecting another handshake. Instead, Jinx just turned and started towards the edge of the grove with Lux in tow, holding her hand. Lux reflexively returned the grip as she squeaked in surprise at being pulled forward, and stumbled for a few steps before getting her feet under her. Her cheeks were warm as she realized that Jinx didn't seem to have any intention of letting go of her. In part, it was because she realized this, and Ari prior to her, was the kindest physical contact she'd been shown since her powers had been revealed over a year ago. Since then, she'd been alone and on the run. Lux still wasn't certain whether or not it was fortune or fate that brought her under Morgana's wing. Well, it didn't really matter at this point. Who she was and what she was had decided her allies for her. "Come on, let's go explore," Jinx said with a broad grin. "I'll show you all the best spots to test new spells once we track down my wands." "For the last time, Jinx, those things are not wands," Evelyn growled. Jinx blew a loud, wet raspberry at Evelyn, who gasped in what might have been mock offense, or maybe actual offense. It was hard to tell. Either way, it was so ridiculous that Lux couldn't help it. For the first time in a year, she started laughing uncontrollably. It was just completely ridiculous. So utterly absurd. She was standing in an ancient grove with witches whose power could shake the foundations of the world, and one of them just blew a raspberry at the other. Evelyn crossed her arms and huffed as she sat down at the table. Ari was pointedly paying attention to none of what was going on, at least not openly, and Morgana was watching with what looked like wry amusement. The whole time, Lux could only clutch at her ribs and laugh. When she finally mastered herself and looked up at Jinx, she was startled to find the woman's smile looked different somehow. It was still too wide. It was still too toothy. There was definitely something more than mildly unhinged about that smile, but there was a change. Maybe it wasn't in her smile. Maybe it was in her eyes. "What is it?" Lux asked. For a moment, Jinx didn't respond. Instead, she reached down and took Lux's hand again, and Lux returned the grip on what felt like instinct. For some reason, it just didn't feel all that strange to be holding her hand. In a way, it almost felt familiar. "Nothing," Jinx said as she turned and started leading Lux towards the edge of the grove again. Then she cast a glance over her shoulder, meeting Lux's eyes with the black-pinned gaze of hers. "You just have a pretty laugh, that's all." "Oh." Lux stumbled again, but found her footing as she followed Jinx to the edge of the forest. For a brief, aching instant in time, Lux saw something else in front of her. Someone else. Someone with a pair of long, electric blue braids and pale skin dancing with scars and tattoos. Then it was gone, and Jinx was back, with her braided vines of deep black flaxen hair and black pinned eyes. Jinx trailed to a pause, and then looked back over her shoulder with a raised eyebrow. "You coming, Blondie?" Despite herself, Lux smiled. "Yeah," she said with a small laugh. "Right behind you."